Motivation is a weird thing. Everyone wants to know how to get it. So many people talk about how to cultivate it like it's some kind of resource that can be mined. I feel that if those solutions had any truth to them, the question of how to become motivated would dry up, and that river is still running very deeply. So how do you get it? The short answer is, you don't. You simply take advantage of it when it appears. Recently, I went to the movies to see The Green Knight. I grew up a Camelot kid, reading books, buying armor, enjoying weekends at the Renaissance Fair, buying wooden swords, and even real ones. Combine that with my current interest in the horror genre, and basically this movie was made for me. I really enjoyed it. I came home reading reviews of the movie, looking at the posters, etc. The next day I went back to making videos, and at the time I was painting a full 40k army, a Drakari one, but I couldn't stop thinking about Arthurian lore. This happens to me quite often where inspiration will strike mid-project. I'll invest in that inspiration, telling myself that when I finish what I'm currently working on, I can treat myself with this new project. Well, I finished the project that I'm working on, and let me show you how often I get back to my inspired projects. I was supposed to paint this bust to reflect my emotions at the time. Real artsy, I know. These small pewter figures were supposed to be a troop of soldiers guarding a caravan in a Roman Lapat-inspired diorama that I wanted to make. All these hot pink colors were supposed to be used in a big hot pink comparison video because that sounds like a great idea. This bust reminded me of Lieutenant Uhura, and my mom is a huge Trekkie, so I wanted to paint it up for her. These Night Hot models were supposed to be used to convert more Blood Knights, but why do that when I have the new ones to paint along with all my other new Soulblight Gravelords? I could do this shamefully for quite a while. Clearly my carrot on the end of the stick method is not working, so it's time for a change. I'm going to shelf my Drakari army for the time being and paint Queen Guinevere, a beautiful 75mm model sculpted by the talented people over at Big Child Creatives. So, let's do that. After I finished cleaning, assembling, gap filling, and mounting this mini on a plinth, I primed it black. There's a lot of contention in the miniature world about what undercoat color to use, and by a lot I mean there isn't much, but there's so little drama that we have to take the small victories we can get. On one hand, if you miss a few small details, they'll be black and hard to notice, and on the other hand, black is kind of a hard color to cover up, so it might cause extra painting work. What black inadvertently causes us to do is to use darker colors from our base coat, working from shadows up instead of an approach like highlights and down, or starting with midtones and moving up and down. It's hard to say how exactly this affects the paint job, but it's an interesting observance nonetheless. I began on the face, experimenting with some new paints from Vallejo, the Malefic set. As aforementioned, because of my dark undercoat, I started from a deep maroon color. I mixed a very pale tone into this maroon to get my midtones and future highlights. When layering, the more steps you have in between each paint determines how seamless your transition will be. Additionally, because acrylic paint can be applied translucently, sometimes you can get multiple layers out of one paint. Because of this, I did many passes, slowly building up to a bright highlight. To give you some reference, painting the skin of the face took 3 to 4 hours, and let's watch about 1 minute of that. Unintentionally, the two colors I chose to mix my midtones caused her face to look very purple as opposed to something more peach colored like human skin tone often is. This likely happened because the maroon color I chose wasn't really maroon at all, but something closer to a purple and possibly a bit colder of a hue. For the eyes, a critical step is to perfectly set up the whites of the eye and then destroy that work so you can do it again for more practice. Obviously. I wanted to experiment with a light blue iris color. When you're looking closely at the mini, this color reads, but the farther away you get, the more it blends in with the white of the eye. I'll need to do more experimentation with lighter eye colors, but this initial test is pretty interesting when viewed up close. After the skin, I moved on to the non-metallic metal gold. I chose gold because the yellow in it would offer up interesting hue contrast compared with the purple skin tone that I accidentally ended up with. Just like with the skin, I'm starting from a dark base coat and working my way up. If you'd like to understand the motivation for why and where I placed my highlights when painting a subject like this, check out the video I've linked in the top right hand corner of the screen. It's going to be much more thorough than I can be in this video. Or if you want to catch my paint sessions live, I'm often on Twitch on Fridays from 1 p.m. CST to 4 p.m. CST. In fact, I'm live right now if you're watching this video soon after its release, so once you're done here, you can come watch me fail to keep a mini in focus and in frame for roughly 3 hours. It's a lot of fun, and sometimes I have friends join me during the stream. A long time ago, I painted a fully non-metallic metal gold elf and got some feedback that I'm applying here that I want to share with you from Rafaela Garcia Marin, which is a very fun name to say for a dumb American. He told me that an important part of gold is the yellow, which is so obvious I feel stupid for missing it. My earlier attempt resulted in something that looked closer to brass. To make sure I was getting adequate levels of yellow in my gold, I used a mid-tone that was fairly rich in saturation and also glazed the final tone with a yellow and red ink mixed together to produce a warm yellow color. This combined with some crispy recessed shading and some brighter spectral highlights, and I achieved probably my most convincing non-metallic metal gold effect to date. Before moving on to the scale mail, let's hear a brief word from today's sponsor, which is me. New to the merch store are 3 limited edition posters that feature current and old designs to Miniac merch. The 2 smaller posters are letterpress printed by a local friend of mine on Cougar White Smooth 100-pound paper, and the final larger poster is a screen print on French Pop Tone Black Licorice 100-pound paper. There are 200 copies of each, and when they're sold out, they're gone forever. Additionally, the printer created 3 unique posters that were a combination of both letterpress printed designs because he had some leftover ink. I'll also sign the backs of these because I'm famous enough that my signature increases the cost of these by at least 1.3%. Please buy them so I can get rid of these poster tubes in my garage and continue to use my vehicle, or because, you like them. Lastly, I'm planning a Kickstarter for Q4 of this year. In fact, here's a little teaser right now. If you want weekly updates about the campaign leading up to the release, you can sign up for a mailing list in the description of this video. That's all for now. Back to the Queen. Now on to the scale mail. Initially, I'm going to ignore all the detail and just paint my highlights where they would be, as if this was a smooth surface, and then I'll get more specific with my highlight placement. Let's switch over to something more intimate so you can get the full information. For a moment, I want to put the sexy B-roll on hold and try to do something. A pet peeve that I have with most miniature painting content on the internet is that the painter tends to seem like they know exactly what they're doing and never question anything. And maybe even I edited this video up until this point to kind of look like that. But the reality is, at least for me it is that I am reacting to what's happening on the model. When I put paint down at any given point, I'm not sure if it's going to do what I want it to do. And once I finally see it on the model, then I can react to what's happening and then go from there. And so for a brief amount of time, maybe just like a minute or 2 minutes, I want to give you a stream of consciousness segment in this video where I am thinking and saying everything that I'm thinking and the motivations for what I'm doing and whatnot. So let's give it a shot. So we're working on this very blue scale mail on Guinevere, and I've left her right breast to do still. And even without looking at the other one, I know for a fact that this is not bright enough. So the first thing I'm gonna do is brighten it up. Because this part of the model is facing up, I am tinting the highlight a little bit yellow. Not a ton, just a little bit, like it's being kind of like flavored by the sun. Flavored by the sun? Everything around me, my palette and my water and my paper towel is very close to me. And that's because while I'm painting and I'm deep in the trenches, I don't want to have to reach for something that is far away. Because Guinevere's breasts are spherical, like most breasts are, I don't think I remember ever seeing any cube breasts. The highlight placement is pretty consistent. You put it on the upper 45 percentile quadrant. That's a terrible explanation. You don't put it on the top, you don't put it on the front, you put it somewhere in between those 2 points. And so I kind of went in with a pretty
opaque highlight, just to kind of get to where I wanted to go faster. Okay, it's okay. It's okay. Now to get some context, I'm going to just do some very sparing edge highlights while trying to stay in focus. The edge highlights give shape to the other scales instead of it just being like a bunch of random blue color like I started with. You can actually see them, and it kind of allows me to kind of make sense of what's going on in the model. At the moment, it's looking okay, albeit a little bit messy. And one thing that I like to do with scales is because essentially they're like super flat and kind of boring volumes, is I like to sneak some color up in between the crack, like right before it gets there. Okay, right now I am totally messing up that scale that I was just putting paint on. And instead of continuing to put paint on it and trying to wet blend on this tiny little scale, I'm just gonna like seal my fate of shittiness and just dry it real quick. So that's pretty much uniformly one color at this point. And now I'm just gonna try again. So with a pretty bright, very slightly aqua highlight, I'm going to hit the bottom of that scale and then kind of sneak it up into the top, leaving some blue toward the bottom of the scale. Almost like there's like a little bit of a bump on top, and then it scoops and then it flares out right at the edge. I know the volume or the shape of the scale is just largely flat, but when we do things like this, it just makes it more fun. And one thing you might notice is that I am painting a bunch of scales in the beginning, but then I start to focus on just one scale, or just a group of 3 scales. And this is very indicative of how I paint in general. I start very broad strokes and then get more and more specific, use smaller and smaller brushes, do tighter and tighter blends and lines and edge highlights and all kinds of stuff like that. It's a very normal process for me when I am painting. Now to get an even better idea about the current status of what's going on here, I'm going to do a recess shade with a dark blue in between these scales that I am working on. And it's okay if you get some dark blue on the raised edge, because we can just very easily clean that up with an edge highlight, which we're gonna do right now. Okay, well, that's a little bit chunky of an edge highlight, and that's because the paint isn't flowing off my brush very nicely, so I need more water. So I'm gonna redo it again, but this time with more water, so the paint flows off my brush nicely. So again, I'm just cleaning up that little bit of a messy recess shade, but also I'm doing a very necessary step of doing an edge highlight just to give definition to all of these nice little scales. I keep applying more and more layers of white paint because white has a tendency to dry much more dull than it shows when it's wet. And this especially happens when I'm kind of half mixing it with other blue colors and things like that. Okay, we're not there yet, but this is what a process of me painting the scale looks like. I'm gonna keep futzing with this. At this point, I spent 3 hours painting just the scale male part, and that's pretty normal for me. I was hoping this gives you some context about what I'm thinking about, how long it takes me to get places, how I'm reacting to what's happening on the model, etc. All right, that's it for now. Time to roll the sexy B-roll. It doesn't actually teach anyone anything, but looks pretty okay.
You'll notice how I'm painting Guinevere inside out, which is to say that I'm painting all the details that are most central to the sculpt and working outward, which will hopefully limit the amount of accidents that I make when painting other parts of the Mini. If you were to think of the reverse, where I'd paint her robes first and then scale male second, there's a higher chance that I might get some scale male color on the robes, but by changing the order, I reduce that chance. Speaking of her robes, let's move on to those. I began with a dark green undercoat with no intention of this green sticking around in the future. At this stage of painting, I feel as though I have enough eye-catching colors in this scheme, and if I were to add more, Guinevere might look like her significantly less known half-sister, Clownevere, and less like a majestic queen. After completing the green base coat, I quickly applied a 95% coverage cream color over the green and realized that maybe this was too big a jump in value. So once I finished that, I added in an intermediate layer of khaki. A very reasonable question at this point would be, why bother with the green if you're going to cover it up? I'm testing a theory that the green will stick around in subtle ways despite me covering it up, especially on the bottom half of the model where I'm painting less layers. My plan is to make the base green in a significant way, so I want some environmental influence in the dress. When I have my scratchy layers applied, I began the long and arduous process of blending them all out, and Lancelot Almighty, is there a lot of this fabric. I decided soon thereafter that I was only really going to try on the areas that were most visible, and less visible parts would only get half my effort. Honestly, this model isn't going to get submitted into a painting competition where it'll be scrutinized under a microscope, so I should just paint what's fun. My mini painting background is a little toxic toward me in that I have to clean up every square inch of the model, but that attitude came from a day and age where the models I painted were significantly smaller and less detailed. Applying that same approach to today's models makes painting to be more of a chore than an enjoyable hobby. So please, join me in my crusade to find the grail of not being such a try-hard all the time so we can avoid ending up like this guy.
He chose poorly.
I want Guinevere to be walking in a swamp because she has a bow, which to me suggests that she isn't your average queen, but someone a little bit more rough around the edges. Because of this choice, I'm going to add a hard line of water/mud that has soaked up her dress up until this snapshot moment of my paint job. It feels weird to have a hard edge like this on an otherwise smooth sculpt, but I think it works with the idea. Just like every other part of this model, even the muddy part of her dress gets some shadows and highlights, but not too many. Again, we're trying to not try hard, so we need to think long and hard about how to put less effort into the model. I've taken notes about how I can try less next time. Next up is the hair, and as previously mentioned, I don't want to add any more colors, so I made her hair black. Very similar to non-metallic metal, I'm painting her hair as though Gwenny here is a L'Oreal model with very shiny hair, focusing my highlights in areas that imply glossiness. The idea here being that the light from above, our main source, is bouncing into the viewer's eyes. Like every part of this model, I am starting with a scratchier, messy layer of color and then coming in later with specificity and accuracy. It's important to make sure you're investing in a paint job that looks good before spending all that time to make it look nice and pretty, only to realize that you put the highlight in the wrong spot or it's the wrong size, etc. What is remaining on this model is a bunch of small details that I will paint with hues already established on this mini because they don't need to be special. The last important detail is the base. I did a blend of blue to green as if the back of the base might be in deeper water than the front. I then added in various vibrant green colors to simulate some kind of lichen, and then with a good variety of greenery, I added on reeds, bushes, and other basing goodness. Lastly, I added Mod Podge Dimensional Magic for a very shallow water effect, to which I added some small glass beads to simulate bubbles, and some random leaves like it had fallen from above into the shallow pools. With that done, it's time to remove the tape from the base, and my muse has been satiated. I want to always be honest with you guys about stuff. My motivation to paint this model ran out somewhere while I was painting the gold. I felt like what I was doing was so pedantic and unenjoyable, which is honestly kind of sad. To me, motivation is fleeting. It ebbs and it flows. When it appears, you should take advantage of it. But when it goes away, you need to have something to replace it, something that isn't dependent on external factors, but in your control. In my case, it's a deadline that I set for this model needing to be done, or a routine that I have for painting. Likely for you, it'll be something different, but if I can have you walk away with anything, it's to ride the motivational wave when it appears, but don't wait for it. Don't try to cultivate it. Just enjoy it while it lasts. That's going to do it for this video, guys. If you like it, give it a thumbs up. And as a reminder, if you want to get weekly updates on my impending Kickstarter campaign, you can find an email list in the description. I'll be sending out emails once a week on Mondays. Don't forget to pick up your limited edition Miniac poster in the Miniac store, also linked down in the description. And if you like me a lot, you can drop a comment professing your undying love for me. Subscribe or die! And most importantly, don't forget to paint